I'm in another pissy ass mood today. Somehow that always happens whenever I make these videos. Yeah, sorry about we're having to use the crappy camera today because the good camera's back there charging and it takes too long to I don't know, it's annoying. But get this, right? Miss Heatherly, it comes into our class, she's whining. She's like, oh, no one ever writes me funny essays. Oh, Gideon, it would make my day if you wrote a satire essay, yada, yada, yada. Mind you, this is the night that it's due. And I'm like, you know what? Out of the goodness of my heart, I'll write a funny essay. I do it. I pump out a banger essay. I get everyone to read it. Adam says it's good. Freaking Sloan Price, the English expert, says it's good. My mom says, I mean, that one doesn't really count as my mom, but it's well agreed upon that this is a banger essay. I turn it in after 2 months. It takes her 2 months to grade it. After 2 months, she leaves the comment, oh, this is so funny, yada yada, just straight glaze. This is one of the most memorable essays I've ever read, blah 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 blah. Gives me an 87 with no rubric. Miss Heatherly, are we dead ass right now? I went back home and I erased my first essay to write this when I would have gotten a higher grade on my boring essay. What are we doing, man? One of the most memorable favorite essays you've ever read and you're giving me an 87? Absolutely unbelievable. This is the kind of stuff that makes you want to drop out of high school and pursue building six-figure infrastructures. But at least we got a pretty fun little video here today. Got some good stuff, some modern stuff. But yeah, per usual, learning targets will be in the description. Thank you, Connor. Matter of fact, my essay is going to be in the description, just so y'all can read that, John, and see the blasphemous of an 87, bro. Unbelievable. Yeah, thank you, Connor Kramer. You are my hero. And practice test, I'll add John down in the description. And let's get right into this. All right, starting off with new federalism, which is nothing like the old federalism. If you remember all the way back, we got the Federalists who wanted to expand central government power and consolidate power in the central government. That was Alexander Hamilton and them. And then we had the anti-federalists who were Thomas Jefferson, who were no, we want states' rights, states' power, etc. And now we got the new federalists who basically just want what the anti-federalists want. This is the primary conservative doctrine, new federalism, and it's talking about more freedom for states, more money for states, less regulation on how states spend their money. And yeah, this was the whole conservative shebang. So I don't know why it's called new federalism. It should be new anti-federalism, but whatever, I don't name these things. And then there's the Environmental Protection Agency, which is exactly what it sounds like. Richard Nixon created this agency, and it was regulating how businesses do their business to make sure that it is not too much pollution. They try to regulate air and water quality to make sure that those are still okay, etc., etc. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as OSHA. This is just the thing that makes sure that when you go to work, it's not those big swinging things that might decapitate you, or basically it's just making sure that the workplace environment is safe. So this is back when Teddy Roosevelt was making all those changes with the meatpacking industry and raising all the standards of work. This is that, but a little bit more. And yeah, some of you might already know what OSHA is, but yeah, that's what it is. Just workplace safety. That's federally mandated. And then we got the expansion of the welfare state. It talks about 3 times on here, but Richard Nixon was big on expanding welfare, which is Social Security, what FDR was doing, government giving back to the citizens, etc. He proposed a guaranteed minimum income, which is crazy coming from a conservative. He adjusted Social Security to inflation, so he was a dog like that. Increased food stamps, all the shebang. So big ups to my drill of Richard Nixon. Aid to families with dependent children. This is just going more in depth where if you had a dependent child, mainly black families, it would give you extra tax benefits, which the white people were no, don't, that's terrible. Supplemental security income. This is just another thing on top of that where automatic benefits for people who are disabled, etc. And then affirmative action. So affirmative action is pretty controversial. It's still talked about a lot today, but this is talking about federal contractors, even colleges, etc., hiring more diverse workforces. And I mean, it's super controversial because they'll pick someone who is black, who is less qualified, over someone who is white and more qualified because the black person had to go through more struggle or whatever. So yeah, it's still talked about today, but that's affirmative action for you. The Warren Burger Court. So this is, I guess I didn't really explain what affirmative action is. It's just, I did. Talking about how contractors have to hire a more diverse workforce because black people have been oppressed or whatnot, and we don't want white people running society, etc. Warren Burger Court. This is, if you remember the Warren Court, that was the one under Lyndon B. Johnson who was passing all the progressive reforms like the Civil Rights Act. The Warren Burger Court, Burger was a judge appointed by Nixon to go onto the court to try to make it more conservative. And Warren Burger didn't really do that. He stayed pretty progressive, and he maintained all of the rulings that the Warren Court had. He maintained the Civil Rights Act, maintained integrating schools, maintained the busing, etc., etc. So, yeah, mandatory busing. This is, you know, if you remember, the buses had to they would start bringing black kids to white kid neighborhoods and white kids to black kid neighborhoods to try to make all the schools better and integrate the schools. And this was brought back to the Supreme Court when Burger was on it, and he upheld it in the case of Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg. And basically all the white people were super pissed, and they were like, we don't want to integrate our schools. But yeah, they didn't get a choice. Regents of University of California versus Bakke. This is talking about affirmative action again, and it got rid of strict racial quotas, which means they can't be like, oh, we need 10 black people and we only have 9, but we have all of our white people, so we'll just bring in more black people. They can't do that, allegedly. Who knows if they still do that or not. But it says that race is allowed to be a factor, but it can't be the only factor. Because that is, if race is the only factor, that's just racism. And then there's Title IX, and this is a big thing for women's rights. Particularly, the main way we see this is in college sports, where it's there have to be the same number of women athletes as there are male athletes, which, I mean, sounds cool, right? But then it's kind of annoying because, you have the guys' football team, and girls don't have a football team, so the guys take up half of your male athletes, and then they have to cut things like swimming or rowing or whatever, which is sort of annoying. But it was getting rid of gender discrimination in higher education is the main thing. But its efficacy is also still debated today. As we get into the more modern stuff, a lot of it is a little bit controversial. But yeah, we'll keep going. All right, next we got where are we? Oh, here we go. We got Chile and Augusto Odier, Pinochet. So where was this? In Chile, they elected this guy named Salvador Allendale, which is great, except the bad thing is that he was a socialist, and Nixon was like, hell no. And so America did what America does, and we got that boy out of there. He was overthrown in a 1973 coup, of course, backed by the United States, in which America was like, and this is our new brilliant man. And it was a brutal, terrible dictatorship by this guy named Augusto Pinochet. So you win some, you lose some. Nixon's recognition and trip to China. So ever since the communists had taken over in China, which had been 20 years at this point, or 20 years or so, America was like, we're not recognizing China, bro. And they claimed the regime was illegitimate, etc., whatever. Nixon was like, hey, you know what Russia would really hate? If I went and hung out with China. And he recognizes China, and he goes to China, and he starts trading with them, and he's becoming friends with China. And Brezhnev, who, by the way, is the most kick-ass Russian leader that's ever existed. He has these amazing eyebrows, and he loves Disneyland. But Brezhnev is like, whoa, what's Nixon doing? That's scary. And China's like, yeah, peep our new friend. And then right after that, he does a trip to Moscow, literally 2 months later. And then the Chinese are like, what? I thought that was my friend. And Brezhnev's like, yeah. And so he was lucky playing them. And then Russia started disliking China, or the Soviets started disliking China, and they both were friends with America. So it was pretty rad. And this friendship with the Soviet Union led to both the Détente and the Strategic Arms Limitation Talk, or SALT. SALT was the agreement to freeze their nuclear missile arsenals and to limit anti-missile systems, basically toning it down there. What if we have less missiles, less weapons? And then the Détente was Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger, who was the Secretary of State. And it was their policy of easing Cold War tensions through diplomacy and arms control. And they're making it less about an ideological confrontation. And they're like, why can't we all just be friends? They favored stability. They wanted to trade. It was pretty lax. So yeah, Nixon was pretty great at foreign policy, widely considered one of the best. Up there with Ronald Reagan and such. So yeah, love to see that out of my boy Nixon. All right, next we got however the hell you say it, the Vietnamesization. Who even knows? And this was Nixon's plan to steadily withdraw U.S. troops and make the war more about the South Vietnamese instead of America. America was the only one fighting the North Vietnamese, and Nixon was like, hey, what if the South Vietnamese were fighting instead of the Americans fighting? And so he started slowly withdrawing troops. This was the Nixon Doctrine, everyone getting a doctrine. And this is saying that the U.S. would assist allies who were fighting, but they would not bear the primary burden. They would not commit the bulk of the troops, right? They would like fiscally support them. They would send them some weapons, help them out with a little bit of intel, but they wouldn't send all their troops to the front line. So that's the Nixon Doctrine. Reasons for unpopularity. A lot of reasons. People were dying. And they got rid of college draft deferments. And all this graphic media coverage that was coming out, like the My Lai massacre, which led to a bunch of distrust in the government, saying that they were mishandling the war, and people were pissed about it. But yeah, anyway, so there was a Nixon Doctrine, and then Nixon was like, gotcha, bitch, I'm going to invade Cambodia. And so he invaded Cambodia after he told everyone he was going to stop invading stuff, tried to cut North Vietnamese supply lines, and this move destabilized Cambodia, led to a huge revolution with like some dictators coming out, and it was like everyone was pissed in America. They were like, what are we doing? And so he was like, yeah, you're right. But then this led to the Kent State thing, where there were a bunch of these protests at Kent State, and the National Guard got called in. The students were protesting the Vietnam War, and I guess National Guard forgot to put their guns on safety because they skra-ta-ta-ta, and they shot 4 people dead. Bummy-ass college, but like still not cool to kill 4 Americans. Definitely not cool in the slightest. What are we doing, guys? And this was sort of like the peak of everyone being like, all right, the government is like cooked. What are we doing? Yeah, then the My Lai massacre comes out, and this is like depiction of American troops who just like borderline, it was genocide. Killed 350 South Vietnamese citizens because they thought they were Viet Cong. And yeah, so that was a rough little bit. And then we had the 26th Amendment, and this just lowered the voting age from 21 to 18 because people were annoyed that they were going off to fight in war, but they couldn't vote. And that was valid. The Pentagon Papers, this was a leak, and it showed, someone leaked papers from the Pentagon, and it showed that like administration after administration had been like lying about the Vietnam War and misleading the public. And then this was more mistrust in the government. People were getting pissed again, et cetera, et cetera. The War Powers Act. So if you remember the Lyndon B. Johnson thing and the Gulf Tonkin resolution, where they were saying that like, oh, LBJ has the war powers to go and commit troops wherever he wants without congressional approval, the War Powers Act is saying, hold that thought, bring it back to Congress. And a limited presidential power and a required congressional approval for prolonged troop deployments. So it sort of changed the power of the presidency, which no longer allowed Nixon to stay in Vietnam, which led to the end of the Vietnamese conflict when Richard Nixon finally pulled out all of the American troops. South Vietnam fell 2 years later. Implications for the U.S., 58,000 Americans died. We were in debt. We were actually broke. It really hurt our financial. Deep national division because everyone was pissed at each other. Mistrust in the government. It discouraged future military engagements. We really demoralized us. And yeah, everyone was just kind of like, that sucked. And it did. And this led to Vietnam syndrome, which was the United States' reluctance to engage in any sort of war overseas because they were like, we don't want to do that again. Like, Vietnam sucked. Why would we want to? And they just thought every war they got in would be like Vietnam. So yeah, that was Vietnam syndrome. Vietnam was not great by any means of the word great, but we got through it. And yeah, it is what it is, I guess. Next, we got this little Watergate break-in. So this was 5 dudes breaking into the Democratic National Committee to go steal some like political game plans or whatever. But apparently, people from politicians from Washington D.C. make for really bad burglars, and they got caught. And everyone was like, "That's really weird. Why was someone breaking into the DNC?" And then they found that they were linked to the Committee for the Re-election of the President. This is Nixon's his campaign organization. It's like trying to get him reelected, and the reporters find that the people who broke into Watergate were paid by the Committee for Re-election of the President, and then they were like, okay, something suspicious is going on. And this is all a part of the Dirty Tricks campaign that was run by the Committee for the Re-election of the President. And the Dirty Tricks is referring to all the unethical methods by which they tried to get Nixon elected. This is including spying, sabotage, even sneaking into the psychiatrist lab, like we'll talk about in a second. So they were just doing a bunch of really crappy, unethical stuff to try to get Nixon reelected. Some of the stuff Nixon did not know about, some of the stuff he did know about. So is he to blame for what? He's not directly here. he is not directly to blame. He did not order those people to go into Watergate, right? After he found out about it, he then said, let's cover it up. So he is definitely responsible for that. He is not responsible for ordering the people into Watergate, just so you guys like know what's going on. And then there's the enemies list. Nixon did maintain an enemies list of like reporters, politicians, celebrities even, of people who were thought to be his political adversaries, so he could misuse government agencies to try to undermine them. So also not great. Burglary of Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office. So Daniel Ellsberg was the guy who leaked the Pentagon Papers showing that the government was mishandling Vietnam. And so he was subsequently thrown onto the enemies list. And then Richard Nixon sent his plumbers to go and raid his psychiatrist's office, where they found a bunch of damaging personal information. And when they were caught, and this came out, this was like one of the primary examples of Nixon's administration's illegal actions. And this is just, yeah, it's just bad. The plumbers unit, this was like a covert, except they really sucked at their job. Covert group formed to stop the leak of classified information. I kind of like it, right? You have the plumbers to stop the leak, and then you have Watergate. I don't know, it's too much sewage going on in this freaking administration. Yeah, so they were trying to stop the leak of information as such with the Pentagon Papers, and their activities included illegal break-ins, wiretaps, whatever was necessary to damage Nixon's political enemies. So that's freaking annoying. And then we got the Watergate hearings, and these were held by Congress to investigate the break-in and the cover-up. And this is where it came out that Nixon and his aides were involved in attempting to conceal the truth, and that led to public outrage and eventually Nixon's resignation. John Dean was a big part of that. He was the key White House witness who testified that Nixon was a part of the cover-up. And yeah, so he was that. And then there was the White House tapes. And the White House tapes, these were audio recordings. I don't know why you would do this, but Nixon made audio tape recordings of him talking about how he was going to cover up the Watergate scandal, which just seems like a bad idea. I'm not a politician, but I guess I am actually president, so I guess that makes me a politician. I would never do something that stupid, right? That is really stupid, to record yourself talking about that. And then the Watergate hearings, and Congress found out, and they ordered them, and after a long process, they got them, and they're like, damn, bro, what are you doing? And so, yeah, that was the main piece of evidence that convicted Nixon. And then there was the Agnew resignation, and Spiro Agnew, this was Richard Nixon's vice president, except the thing about Spiro Agnew was that he really liked to take bribes when he was governor of Maryland, and he also really liked to take bribes when he was the vice president, and people found out about that, and so he had to resign. And he traded resigning for no jail time, so it was a good deal in his eyes. And then they were like, oh, Nixon's about to get impeached. Oh, wait, there's no vice president, I guess. We'll just have no president. No, like, what are we supposed to do? And so Nixon appointed Gerald Ford to be his new vice president, and then Nixon resigned. And, oh, well, first, before he resigns, Gerald Ford was just some guy from Michigan, I think, and he was chosen to be the next president only because he would pardon Richard Nixon once he became president. And then there's the Sunday Night Massacre. Nobody actually died. This is just Nixon firing the special prosecutor against him, and which this led to the attorney general resigning, and it was a whole mess. You probably won't have to know that, but this led to the articles of impeachment, where Congress was going to impeach him. They had the votes to do so, and Nixon was like, you know what, I don't want to get impeached. Or he's just like, I'm not trying to do all that, so he just made it easy and resigned. And then Gerald Ford became president, and then he pardoned Nixon, and that was about all he did in his presidency. Then he got smoked by Jimmy Carter in re-election. So, yep, that was Nixon's little Watergate scandal. Was it bad? Yes. Is Nixon still in my top 10 presidents because he was a baller everywhere else? Honestly, yeah. I rock with Nixon heavy. He didn't even order the break-in. I feel bad for him. Should he have covered it up? No. But it is what it is, man. And, yeah, now we can move on to... who's after that? Jimmy Carter. Let's move on to Jimmy Carter and that whole catastrophe of foreign policy. All right, now we get to my boy Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, he has a great heart, and I love Jimmy Carter. Sadly, he wasn't a great president. He was dealt some pretty bad cards. I mean, he didn't really make the most of his situation, but, I mean, unless you ask Shrieker, Jimmy Carter wasn't really that great of a president. He was a great guy, though. He was a great post-presidency president. Nothing against Jimmy Carter. He just wasn't that great of a president. Let's hop into some of the reasons, starting with the 1970s economic stagnation. So for a plethora of reasons, like the Arab Oil Embargo Act, which we're about to talk about, the devaluation of the dollar, increased government spending, decline of United States manufacturing, All of these things, high inflation, all of these things led to slow economic growth and what was called the 1970s economic stagnation, which was sort of Jimmy Carter's poor economic policies. And now the big thing was the Arab Oil Embargo Act. So for background, the Jews in Israel are enjoying Yom Kippur, when all of a sudden an Arab coalition invades them with a little sneaky. Sadly for the Arabs, the current Secretary of State for the United States was a Jewish man named Henry Kissinger, and he sent all of our F-4 Phantoms over there, quickety split. And Israel, with the help of America, basically just smoked that Arab pack. And all the Arab nations were super pissed that America was helping Israel, and so they did the Arab oil embargo. And this just put an embargo on the United States and some other Western nations, and this led to the quadrupling of the price of oil in America. So as you can see, that hurt the American economy. It led to fuel shortages. These are the effects. But one of the big effects was showing that, hey, we as America are too reliant on foreign oil and foreign fuel. And so this led to a big energy industry in America, and that was one of Carter's great victories as president, is that he was able to domesticate a lot of energy production, and he was also super environmentally conscious, but we really got a lot of fuel going inside of America instead of relying so much on the Saudis. We still do, but to a lesser extent. That was the Arab oil embargo, and then there's deindustrialization, and this is people realizing, hey, it's cheaper to pay Chinese children to build your shoes than it is to pay a guy in Detroit. So we started doing that. And then Detroit and Chicago basically became broke because no one was building anything, and everyone moved to the Sun Belt, where they could work for like Lockheed Martin and whatnot, and do Excel spreadsheets and whatever. So the Sun Belt had this huge population growth. The Sun Belt is where we live, because they were developing towards the industries like technology and defense. And so the North, whatever it's called, the Rust Belt or whatever, people were moving away from there, and they were moving to the Sun Belt. The Helsinki Accords, this was an agreement signed by 35 different nations, including the United States and the Soviet Union, to try to ease tensions. This was part of the Detente or whatever. And they were saying, hey, let's focus on economic cooperation, human rights, mutual security. It didn't directly end the Cold War, but it helped to lower tensions. In the 70s, it was pretty tame part of the Cold War. Election of Jimmy Carter. So Carter won. He destroyed Gerald Ford. Nobody liked Gerald Ford. He focused on energy policy, environmental concerns, human rights, but obviously he struggled with unemployment, high inflation, economic stagnation, and the Iran hostage crisis. But one of his big wins was human rights. He was really focused on human rights of not just the people in America, but also internationally, so he was super big on that. Sticking up for the human rights of people in Argentina, where they'd been abused by the American dictator that America installed there, and just around the world. Sometimes his love for human rights would supersede like American interests in the Cold War, and so conservatives would get pissed that he was like putting human rights above like Cold War interests. But that's one of the good things about Jimmy Carter. And then there were also the Camp David Accords, and this brokered peace between Egypt and Israel. And Egypt was really the strongest nation in the middle, or Israel was the strongest nation, but Egypt was the second strongest. And so without Egypt, the Arab coalition had no chance against Israel. So that really ended the Yom Kippur War. And it was this big achievement of peace in the Middle East, but it also angered a bunch of other Arab nations. They were like, what the freak, bro? We're trying to get rid of Israel. And so if you're anti-Semitic, you're probably pretty pissed about that. But everyone else was like, yay, peace in the Middle East. Who would have thunk? Obviously, it lasts like 2 years or whatever. It's the Middle East. What can you expect? People were pissed about it. But for the most part, we had peace. So that was chill. Some of the people who were pissed about it were the people in Iran. For a little bit of background, America had placed this guy named the Shah. They put him in Iran. He was super Western. He was pro-capitalism, pro-Western nations, pro-trade, pro-modern society, Sharia law, which is the super Muslim. Everyone has to go to mosque. Women have to cover their face. Women have less rights, etc., etc. And these Islamist extremists in Iran were like, we hate the West. Why are they trying to interfere in our lives? So they overthrow the Shah, who was placed by the Americans. And so the Americans are like, crap. Iran is now an Islamist extremist state. And then furthermore, Iran is like, we freaking hate America. So they storm the United States embassy and they take 52 diplomats hostage. And this really hurt Carter's his his presidency because like there was nothing he could do because America had a policy of not negotiating with terrorists, and so the 52 people were just sort of hostage, and that was one of the reasons why he got destroyed in the next election by Ronald Reagan. And then there's the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and this is basically the Soviet Vietnam. They invade Afghanistan, and then we implement the Carter Doctrine. Can we get the Gideon Doctrine at this point? You know what? I'll give you all the Gideon Doctrine. The Gideon Doctrine is the government is paying for every teenage male to go to Fort Lauderdale and get some slop because there's not enough of that going around. And so they implement the Carter Doctrine. They're giving aid to these Afghan government to fight off the Soviets, and then the Afghans do fight off the Soviets, and then the Afghans are like, yo, we got all these guns, let's go blow up America. So it sort of backfired. But yeah, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. It didn't work. It was bad for their economy and everything. Yeah, so that was Carter's presidency, and then Ronald Reagan destroys him, and we can talk about that in a second. Just smoked this kid up in Clash Royale. Join the clan, by the way. Kinley is bad. We got like 25 Wesley kids in right now. It's kind of bumping. But yeah, big ups to whoever left these glasses at my house a couple days ago. Thank you for your donation. These are now my new favorite glasses. Your contribution to the stream has been duly noted, and thank you. Don't worry, I know some of you guys are thinking, oh shit, not a song. Don't worry, it's not a song. I just had to split this one up into 2 days because Miss Cluck is doing classic Miss Cluck things and giving us 17-page learning targets, and so here we are. Moving into Ronald Reagan, the glorious king of conservatives. In this whole era, generally thought of as pretty good, unless you're like pretty far on the left scale. But yeah, let's get into this little like 12-year reign of conservatives, starting with the neoconservatives. So these were just like a group of conservatives, which was basically just every conservative back then, and they gained influence in the late 70s and 80s, and they advocated for strong military against the Soviet Union and against communism, which is very different than, the detente of Richard Nixon and Jimmy Carter, where they were like trying to lessen tensions. Ronald Reagan is like, nope, we are going right after communism. We are going to go destroy the Soviet Union. Rah. Skeptical of huge government programs, supported strong defense and aggressive action, etc. That is the MO of the neoconservatives, and one of the big parts of them is like the moral moral majority, slash religious right. And this is, it's deeply rooted in Christianity, and they're like, we are Christians, our American culture is Christian. Some of these new things that the government is bringing along is pretty in opposition to our Christian morals and our traditional, Christian society, and so we're going to fight against that. These are things like the ERA, which is right below the Equal Rights Amendment, and this was like giving equal rights under the law to it's like regardless of gender, it gives them some equal something, who knows. But yeah, the ERA is for women and men to be equal, either in the eyes of the court or in the eyes of something. But, the neoconservatives, specifically the person right below it, Phileas Schlafly, who was actually a woman, was saying that it was undermining traditional, gender roles, and women were supposed to make sandwiches and men were supposed to go do the work. And she actually argued that this would be bad for women, and that women shouldn't go into the workforce, and the ERA was going to be bad, etc. And that was sort of like a neoconservative thing. And yeah, the ERA did not pass. The conservatives stopped it. It failed. So yeah. Then there's California tax revolt / Proposition 13, and people in California were pissed that they had to keep paying higher and higher property taxes, and eventually they had a revolt against property taxes, which sounds pretty rad, I must say. And this revolt helped to solidify the conservative position on taxation, and Ronald Reagan, it influenced him. He was the governor of California, and so it influenced his presidency. The election of 1980. So this is Ronald Reagan versus Jimmy Carter, and man, oh man, did Jimmy Carter get a good old spanking, bro. We all love Jimmy Carter, nice guy. He got whooped by Ronald Reagan. The issues were like the high inflation, the stagnant economy, the Iran hostage crisis, whereas Reagan was promising a new direction, talking about conservative economic policies, tough stance against the Soviet Union, tough foreign policy, which wasn't, they were just different issues, right? He didn't really care so much about the environment and whatnot, whereas Jimmy Carter did, but it was just the issues where it spoke more to the people in that election. And the outcome, Reagan won a decisive victory Although he won 489 electoral votes, he secured 51% of the popular vote. So that one is not as decisive as it seems, but the one after he wins like 60%, which is a pretty large margin. Second only to, of course, Calvin Coolidge, who secured 65%. But yeah, he won an electoral landslide, but if you look at the actual states, they're all like plus 0.5 Reagan, plus 0.6 Reagan. So it was a really close race. It just doesn't look close from, the bird's eye view. And now let's get into the Reagan Revolution. And starting off with the goals of the Reagan Revolution, these were cutting taxes for everybody, but primarily the wealthy, deregulating industries, and restoring a strong military posture. As I said before, going hard on communism, promoting individual freedoms through lower taxes and reduced government interference, yada, yada, yada. And the great plan for all this was Reaganomics, or also called supply-side economics. And this was the idea of proposing tax cuts, especially for like the big businesses, corporations, ultra-wealthy, and that would stimulate investment and increase and in turn increase employment, trickle down economics, where if you give tax breaks for the ultra wealthy, then they will have more money to invest, which will lead to more money for the workers, which will just lead to more money for everybody. Didn't really work, but you know what? It's a great idea. I mean, there was a world where it could have worked if Ronald Reagan didn't spend all his money on building Star Wars. But yeah, it didn't really work the way it was supposed to. But it mostly disproportionately benefited the wealthy. But it was a cool little idea that supply side, meaning that they were going to make so much supply that everyone was just rich. Income gap. So this is the Reaganomics policy contributed to a widening wealth gap, meaning that the ultra rich were getting rich. Like it was like if everyone was like here, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer type gig. It was kind of like a Gilded Age Part 2. Middle class wages stagnated, which they were already stagnated from Jimmy Carter, so those brothers were going through a hard time. And the poorest even saw a decline in income and deficit spending. So Reagan decreased taxes, and then he increased military spending. So it was kind of like, oh, we're spending a lot more money than we're making. But the idea was that they would be actually making more money like they did with Calvin Coolidge after they cut taxes because, there'd be so much more investment and people would be making a lot more money that even though they had reduced taxes, the government would actually still make more off less taxes. That didn't actually work. So yeah, they made less money and spent more money, and so everyone was broke, and that's what we call a deficit in spending. Trade deficit as well, as we deindustrialized and everyone moved their businesses to China and India and whatnot for manufacturing. We started importing way more stuff and exporting way less stuff, so our trade deficit also grew. And all that coming together, if we had to assess Reagan's economic legacy, it's really not a lot. People talk about Reagan like he's one of the presidential greats. I love Reagan. I think he's great. But economy was not his strong suit, just plain and simple. He had an idea. He had Reaganomics. He went for it. I mean, I admire that, but it just didn't really work. It was too far. It was too. I don't know if it was just the wrong time or if it was just too much, but it just didn't really work out. And they disproportionately benefited the wealthy, while the working class and the minority communities suffered due to job losses, deindustrialization, etc. Overall, America's GDP still grew, but we were put in a little bit, like our debt tripled, and we were put in a little bit of a fiscal debacle that we're still sort of in today. But then we'll move into where Reagan truly shined, and that was in foreign policy. And Reagan was sort of thrown into the fire with the foreign policy, starting with a Lebanese terrorist attack on a United States Marine base in Lebanon that killed 241 American Marines. And this was like extra bad because the Marines were just there on like a peacekeeping mission. They weren't necessarily trying to complete any objectives. And so it was just not great. I mean, obviously 241 Marines died, but it kind of felt like they died for nothing. And Americans were kind of pissed about it. And so Ronald Reagan did what my dear German friend Janina likes to say all the time, and he just kind of said, damn, and moved on. He took all of our troops out of Lebanon, and he was just kind of like, that sucks. And all of America was like, that sucks. But there was really nothing we could do about it. Lebanon was embroiled in civil war. It was hard to maintain supply lines. Reagan did the best option, which was just withdrawing from Lebanon. And then instead of being involved in the Middle East for once, we decided to get involved in Latin America, starting with Nicaragua and the Sandinistas and the Contras. If you guys know Coach Coach Slot has a strange affinity for the Sandinistas, and they're like a Marxist communist, rebel group. So I mean, that's just like a little bit strange. But Reagan still supported the Contra rebels, who were fighting against the evil communist Sandinistas, who were like the official government in Nicaragua. And despite the congressional ban on U.S. aid to the Contras, Reagan secretly authorized the sales of arms of the money that he got from Iran, and was able to fund the Contras through these illegal channels, which he might or might not have known about, which led to the Iran-Contra affair, which I guess is down here somewhere. But yeah, all you have to know is Reagan supported the Contras because they were American lovers, and he did not like the Sandinistas because they liked communism. And then there's El Salvador, and Reagan supported the Salvadorian government fighting against evil communist insurgent rebels. Obviously, his administration ignored or downplayed the human rights abuses committed by the Salvadorian military, but anything in the name of communism. And then there's Grenada, and Reagan, I guess he was just kind of feeling bad about himself after Lebanon, and he went and conquered Grenada for almost no reason. The official reason was to oust a pro-Cuban government, citing the concerns about American citizens on the island, and the geopolitical threat of communist influence. But basically, it was just like a feel-good mission. They were like, let's go take over this impoverished country so we can feel good about ourselves. Yay! To sort of get their morale back. And then there's the Iran-Contra affair, and this is, there were these people in Iran who needed guns, and so Reagan was illegally, or I guess Reagan's administration, Reagan might or might not have known about it, was illegally selling money to Iran, or not selling money, selling guns to Iran, and then they had all this money from the guns that they were selling to Iran, and they're like, well, crap, what are we going to do with this money? And they're like, oh, what if we illegally gave it to the Contras, who Congress said we cannot give it to? And eventually it was uncovered, and they went, everyone thought this was going to be the end of Reagan, and they went to Congress, and it looked like there was no evidence showing that Reagan knew about it, or that Reagan was involved. It was just the members of his administration. Did he know about it? Maybe, probably, but there's no evidence. So he was able to avoid impeachment and the same fate as Richard Nixon and eventually Bill Clinton. Strategic Defense Initiative / Star Wars. This is Reagan's super cool idea to waste a bunch of money and make some cool ideas about, having like a, how in Israel they have the Iron Dome? It would kind of be like the Iron Dome, but in space, where you're able to shoot down nuclear missiles coming from the Soviet Union to protect America. The issue is that world peace teetered on the idea of mutually assured destruction, which is that if one side sends nuclear bombs, the other side's going to send nuclear bombs, and the world's going to end. And if Reagan gets Star Wars, and he's able to stop Russian nuclear bombs, then it's no longer mutually assured destruction, it's just American assured victory. And that really scared the Soviets, because they thought Reagan was actually going to do it. Little did they know, we were never anywhere close. And basically they just wasted a bunch of money. Who even knows, maybe laundered it, and they came up with a few illustrations of ideas. But yeah, he never actually did it. So that's what you have to know about that. And then there's Mikhail Gorbachev, who is he's just a chill guy. And he had a bunch of reforms in the Soviet Union that I would argue were for the better. Well, I'm American, so obviously I'd argue they're for the better. But like Glasnost, this is Gorbachev's policy of openness. Glasnost just means openness. And this is aiming to reduce censorship in the Soviet Union. So this is encouraging more political participation. This is allowing critique of the government, which previously had been a total no-no in the Soviet Union. You were not allowed to talk bad about the government. But Glasnost changed that. And then there's Perestroika, however you say that. And this is his economic reform that restructured the Soviet economy so it incorporated a little bit of market-based capitalist elements. And it wasn't full communism because, as everyone knows, full communism doesn't work. What kind of losers would think that? And then, so yeah, those were two big reforms that sort of changed. It just changed the Soviet Union a lot. Eventually, it does end up collapsing, but it sort of gave it a little bit more life before it fell apart. And then there's the INF, or the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, and this was just an agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union that they were just going to get rid of all of their intermediate range nuclear missiles, which eased Cold War tensions. So that was great. And then we got the election in 1988. Ronald Reagan had a hoot and a half as president, but his time's up, and he left, and now we get his vice president, former head of the CIA, whatever, George H.W. Bush, as the Republican candidate, and he was basically like, y'all love Ronald Reagan. I'm like if Ronald Reagan was a little bit uglier and a little bit worse at giving speeches, and my other guy really likes crime, And you know what? That message resonated with about 54% of voters, and George H.W. Bush won, just like Reagan. Yeah, the issues of the campaign centered around economy, crime, foreign policy. Bush was, of course, capitalizing on Reagan's popularity and painted the Democrat guy as weak on crime. And yeah, Bush won with 54% of the vote and maintained the Republican hold on the White House and all of politics. So yeah, the conservative era continued for 4 more years until we get to Bill Clinton, of course. But yeah, so that was the fun little, conservative era, and the king of all conservatives, Ronald Reagan, ladies and gentlemen. All right, very briefly before we talk about my favorite part of this whole unit, which you can kind of see a little sneak peek at the bottom. Miles Trellis knows what's coming. We're going to talk about the end of the Cold War. So Cold War's been happening basically since the end of World War II, and due to Ronald Reagan's tough stance on communism during his presidency, it leads to the end of the Cold War. It all happens during George H.W. Bush's presidency, but it's all primarily due to the stuff that Ronald Reagan did. Starts with the fall of the Berlin Wall. When, I don't know if you remember in class, we watched that guy accidentally announced the end of the Berlin Wall. So that's a big thing. East Germany is able to reunite with West Germany. They become one state. That is huge. And 2 years after that, the end of the Cold War officially comes when Gorbachev resigns. He's the head of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapses. You get all these little independent states popping up. And yeah, Russia becomes its own state. Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, all of these nations are becoming their own. For the most part, they become democracies. And yeah, they sort of fall out of the Russian sphere of influence, except for Belarus. Poor Belarus. But yeah, Cold War ends. America, we are victorious. When are we not? And yeah, we won. And yeah, USSR splits up into 15 independent nations, and we, the United States, emerged as the sole global superpower. And along with this is the end of apartheid. Kind of random story right around here, but in 1990 in South Africa, apartheid, of course, is like the hierarchical. It's just like segregation, basically. We're saying whites were higher in society than blacks, but sort of on a more extreme scale. And the leader of the resistance against the apartheid in South Africa was this guy named Nelson Mandela, and he was imprisoned for 27 years. But in 1990, he was released from prison, and it marked a huge turning point in the fight against apartheid. And by 1994, South Africa held its first democratic election with blacks electing Mandela as president and formally ending all the decades of institutional racial segregation and white minority rule. So yeah, that was what was bumping, and now we can go to my...
Attack orders were issued to treat the Iraqi army like a snake by first cutting off its head and then killing it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump scare y'all like that. I just think that the Gulf War is super...
Withdraw from Kuwait or face a coalition ready and willing to employ all means necessary. 5 months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined.
Alright, let's talk about the Iraq invasion of Kuwait. And the United States response. This is one of the most underrated aspects of American history, in my opinion. We basically just pull up to the Middle East and spin the block in like 2 months. But basically, Saddam Hussein is like, how could I be mischievous today? And he was like, should I genocide my own people? Nah, I'll do that later. Matter of fact, what if I go and invade Kuwait for the sole reason of pissing off the rest of the world? And they're like, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. And so Iraq invades Kuwait, and Kuwait is the only member of the Middle East. This is more than you'll need to know, but they're the only member of the Middle East that's not a part of OPEC, which is like basically like a union about oil, and they kind of like regulate the prices. So Kuwait's not a part of that, so they always give like a little bit of a discounted price, especially to America. And when Iraq invades Kuwait, Kuwait oil becomes no longer available, so it's more expensive, and basically the whole world is pissed off because they love Kuwait oil. And so they all come to their aid, and they're like, this is not cool. We're talking the Brits, the French, the Americans, the Saudis, 26 other nations. They all pull up, and they do Operation Desert Storm, and they destroy, it's a 40-nation coalition, and they destroy Saddam Hussein and the Iraqis in a matter of months. At this point, Iraq was actually like the 3rd or 4th strongest military in the whole world, And so they thought it was going to be difficult, but not even. We just steamrolled right over them. So yeah, Iraq invades Kuwait, and the United States response is, as you just heard, withdraw from Kuwait or face a coalition ready and willing to employ all means necessary, and employ all means necessary we did. Massive air and ground assault, advanced weaponry. We got the M1 Abrams for the first time, which proved highly effective. We only lose like 180 U.S. soldiers compared to the thousands and thousands of Iraqi deaths. We didn't. I don't even think we lost a single tank because our tanks were so much more advanced, and there were big desert storms, and we had night vision, and they didn't. So we obliterated them. It was a massacre. And the outcome: Kuwait was liberated swiftly. Low American casualties, heavy Iraqi losses. Saddam Hussein remained in power. That was the controversial bit, right? George H.W. Bush said, we're going to get in, we're going to liberate Kuwait, we're going to destroy the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which is like their main military force. They did all three of those things. And then some hardline conservatives were like, and then go capture Saddam Hussein and send that bid to prison. And George H.W. Bush didn't do that. He was like, I'm not trying to get bogged down in another Vietnam. I'm going to stay out. We did what we came to do. And yeah, and this was sort of seen as like, if in hindsight, it's kind of like, oh, what are we doing? Because Saddam Hussein goes on to genocide his own people, and we have to go back into Iraq to go get him. But you can at least respect the fact that he was sticking to his plan. And yeah, the Powell Doctrine, or the whatever, just the Cheney Doctrine and the Powell Doctrine, whatever. They were sticking with the Powell Doctrine. Get in there, get out, do what you meant to do, and they did that. So yeah, big victory for the Americans, and it's freaking baller. We own the world, bruh. And now moving on to everyone's favorite adulterer, Bill Clinton. Starting off with Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So Bill Clinton really rocked with the gays, and at the time, gays were not allowed to serve in the military. So he adopted this thing called Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which means that the policy allowed gays and lesbians to serve in the military as long as they didn't openly disclose their sexual orientation. So it was kind of like bending the rules a little bit to get the gays into the military, fighting on the front lines for America, just as they should be. And then North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. This was basically saying no tariffs, no trade restrictions between Mexico, Canada, and America. And this had a huge economic boost. Critics say that it led to some job losses in certain sectors and some environmental concerns. But overall, NAFTA was great. We were making crazy money. Everyone was making good money. It was really just great stuff. Everyone loves NAFTA. And so that's one of the main reasons why Clinton gets reelected, is because of the economic boost from NAFTA. Congressional midterm elections in 1994. So basically, every time there's someone really Republican or really Democrat, there's a swing back, and in the midterms, the Republicans gain control of both the House and the Senate. This is under like the Contract of America movement, which is like off-brand, making America great again. They were arguing for the classic limited government, welfare reform, basically meaning getting rid of welfare, tax cuts. And yeah, this was talking about some frustration with the early Clinton presidency. But then sure enough, Bill Clinton, he's too charming. Everyone loves Bill Clinton. And yeah, he beats Bob Dole, who was the Republican candidate. The main issues were the economy, welfare reform, taxes. But America just trusted Bill Clinton enough. He had done enough for the economy, like NAFTA. Yeah, he benefited from the economic recovery and the successful welfare reform. So yeah, he won pretty handily. Then there's the Balkan crisis, which, shocker, there's a crisis in the Balkans. When is there not? But the breakup of Yugoslavia led to a bunch of like ethnic conflicts because everyone in the Balkans hates each other, and NATO intervened to stop Bosnia. And there's like this whole Bosnian war thing. And if you don't know, if you go back, this is when Joe Biden was like the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and he's talking. He was so cool back then, regardless of what you think about him now. Back then, you watch like Joe Biden, like Bosnian War Biden. That boy, he was like, I suggested we bomb Belgrade. I suggested we go in and like kill blah 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 blah. He was just like he was standing on business, as the youth would say. But yeah, NATO intervenes. Bill Clinton is actually a national hero in Kosovo because he like stopped the Bosnians from genociding them. So they have songs like, "Thank you, America, you are our friend. We love you, Bill Clinton." It's like kind of cute. But yeah, Balkan crisis. Bill Clinton takes care of it. Make sure there's no genocide. You probably won't have to know that, but yeah. All right, now let's talk about globalism. And honestly, globalism is what creates the world that we live in. And like all that you know is globalism and multiculturalism. This is like as important as the Industrial Revolution. Globalism, Miss Cluck, if you watch the discussion questions, she says the definition like 3 times. So hopefully you know what globalism is, talked about in human geography as well. But it's talking about the increasing interconnectedness of economies and the different interconnectedness of cultures and societies and how the flow of goods happens. This is talking about how someone builds something in China, ships it all the way around the world to America, and or even like, you know, some guy from like Brazil is watching baseball in Japan, or like they're watching anime that comes from Japan, or like some guy from the Middle East is like, it's just, the world is getting smaller, and this is all because of the internet basically. And as the internet has advanced, as technology has advanced, the world has just become smaller. You're able to access things from all over the world, and that whole process is known as globalization, where like you probably have an Indian restaurant, or I guess that's more multiculturalism, but like if you wanted to buy something, like a local something from like anywhere around the world, you pretty much can, because that's just sort of the way our world works. And that all happens during the 90s with the internet revolution, and it is ridiculously important. Up there with the Industrial Revolution. Causes of the economic expansion. This is all tech innovations. Computers, internet, even some deregulation, strong consumer spending, people have more money, the booming stock market, longest period of growth, largest period of growth in American history up to this point. It was actually ridiculous. AI is coming up to match that. I mean, I don't think it's going to, but like, it was just kind of like insane, you know? So yeah, everything explodes, everyone becomes rich. Americans with Disability Act, this law banned discrimination against people with physical or mental disabilities in jobs, public spaces, transportation, and this just promoted greater inclusion. Multiculturalism, this is like, in America, it had always been the belief that we were like an Anglo society, right? We were a white Christian society. We had some foreigners, but they were sort of outsiders, whatever. Our main culture was white and American. But that all sort of changed in the 90s. We had so much, it was sort of a mindset change, right? Along with all the immigration, it was a mindset change that instead of like trashing all of these different ethnicities and cultures, we started celebrating them. And so we're talking about all the different ethnicities. You can go to like the Indian shop right down the street, or the Chinese store, or like whatever. Like we have all these different cultures in America. Yes, white Anglo culture is still very dominant and still very, you know, in our society. But I mean, it's a much more inclusive space than even anywhere else in the world, honestly. America is the most multicultural place, and it's really cool. So yeah, rock on, America. Then there are the culture wars. Of course, when you have multiculturalism, you have culture wars. And this isn't necessarily so much about racism as it is about political ideology. And this is the first time we're seeing political morals, like different morals of different cultures clashing against each other. And it's not always across cultures. It was a lot of white people fighting white people. But it's the progressives versus the Republicans. The progressives saying, oh, you can get an abortion, it's fine. Or, you know, God's not real. We don't need to mandate school prayers. That's offensive. Or like, talking about censorship or whatever. And then you have the conservatives saying, no, we need women to stay at home to teach the children. We want prayer in school. We want no gay people because, you know, that's wrong, obviously. No to abortion, etc., etc., etc. So that's the culture war. So we're still in that period now where, like, we still have disagreements over abortion. Gay people isn't as much of an issue anymore. Everyone sort of accepts that that's the way it should be. But, you know, there's a big, you know, social issues were never really a problem until the 90s, right? No matter what your social beliefs were, you elected a president over their economy, over their foreign policy, stuff that was not, you know, social stuff. But that all sort of changes in the 90s. And then the Defense of Marriage Act, this is not defending gay marriage, this is defending normal marriage between a man and a woman. This is the federal law defining marriage as a man and a woman. Note, this is not banning gay marriage. This is federal, meaning that as far as the federal government is concerned, marriage is between one man and one woman. The states, all of the progressive states and some conservative states allowed gay marriage, right? If you lived in California, you could be gay and you were totally fine. If you lived in Texas, you could not have a gay marriage. So it varied on state until Obama, when they legalized gay marriage all across America. Family values, of course, this is just talked about by conservatives in the 90s to promote, you know, the traditional family structure and going back to our old, you know, our old culture. But that's really just not feasible in a society that's only like 50% white at this point, right? We can't make our culture the only culture because it's really not. But yeah, the family values, obviously, it's their standpoint for fighting against all of these, fighting the culture wars. Basically, these are their values that they want to keep inside of America. And Bill Clinton was a scandalous man. He had a gazillion different scandals, but the most famous one and the most important one was his sexual affair with Monica Lewinsky. I'm gonna be so for real. I don't blame their brother. I don't know if you've seen Hillary Clinton, but I don't blame him in the slightest. I probably would have done the same thing. Matter of fact. But yeah, it doesn't matter. He gets impeached anyway. But he's just so cool that they don't actually want to charge him. So they get it through the House of Representatives. They say, "Oh, you lied under oath," which he might have done, but like whatever. And then they send it to the Senate, but they don't have the 2/3 votes required to impeach him. So he's chilling, and he just rides out the rest of his term, and he doesn't need to seek re-election because it's already his second term, so he's fine. Even in assessment of the Clinton presidency, and despite all the scandals, he was still popular, right? People still liked him. When asked about the scandals, he was just like, "Yeah, what do y'all care? Like, I give you a good economy, and I'm just like a normal guy. Like, why are you upset?" And people were just like, "Yeah, I mean, that's sort of respectable." Nobody really cared. They had a good economy. They were happy. That's sort of the way it should be out, right? I feel like if you just turn off the news and live your life and life is good, why be mad at the president? That's my personal opinion. But, oh God, Gesundheit. But yeah, his presidency was marked by centrism as the two sides became more polarized and, the evolving public view on morality. And then we have the election of 2000, where it's Democrat Al Gore, who was Bill Clinton's vice president, going up against George W. Bush, son of George H.W. Bush. And the issues of the campaign, they actually sort of stayed away from both ends because, they knew that they would alienate too many voters by, going too far into like abortion or healthcare stuff. So instead they focused on sort of moderate poll-driven messages, and this led to both of them being pretty popular. And it was a super close race. It came down to Florida, and it was separated by like a few hundred votes. And they were like recounting. Sometimes Bush would win, sometimes Gore would win. It was sort of a mess. But the Supreme Court, that was a conservative Supreme Court, eventually ruled to stop the recount, citing some equal protections concerns. And in the end, George W. Bush won the presidency with the Electoral College despite losing the popular vote, which has happened quite a lot for Republican presidents. And then, he gets into office. He's like, "Whoop, diddly dee, I'm the president." Nope, here comes Osama bin Laden and 9/11. So, Al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 planes. 3,000 Americans were killed. They crashed into 2 World Trade Centers, one into the Pentagon and one into a Pennsylvania field that we think was going for the Capitol. But yeah, it was just total utter shock. This was the first time America had been attacked on our own soil since Pearl Harbor, and people were outraged to say the least. We were we didn't even think this was like a possibility. And yeah, we were pissed. So yeah, Osama bin Laden, he was the mastermind behind the attacks, the leader of Al Qaeda, and this was just not one of those terrorist organizations. And it's all because of him that we have to go through TSA. It's quite annoying. And yeah, Osama bin Laden was their leader of Al Qaeda, and this was a terrorist network that was founded by bin Laden. They carried out the 9/11 attacks and had previously been linked to bombing a different World Trade Center in 1993 and 1998 embassy bombings in Africa. They were just the worst, basically. So yeah, Osama bin Laden, Al Qaeda, not a good guy, but don't worry, America claps back, except like sorta. We just end up going to Afghanistan and chilling there for a while. But yeah. Oh, you guys thought it was over? No. But I'm just gonna breeze through this because nobody really cares. This is just modern stuff. I don't think this is even on the AP, but it is on our test, so I'm just gonna go through it super quickly. All right, let's try to breeze through the. Oh, who's on? Isabella Cruz. Hey, shout out for grinding on Monday. That's what I like to see. All right, let's go quick. Kyoto Protocol, a lot less cool than it sounds. It was this international treaty aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's like the Paris Climate Accords. But yeah, we signed it, but it did unfairly exclude developing nations, but that's whatever. Then the Bush Doctrine, which of course everyone gets a doctrine. You know how we roll. Bush Doctrine, this is basically saying we want retribution. We're coming. if you're harboring terrorists, prepare for some democracy. And it was sort of like there might be a terrorist in that school. Let's blow it up just in case, sort of. It wasn't always that extreme, but we were going around sort of guns a-blazing as a part of Operation Enduring Freedom, which is as cool as it sounds. Basically we just pull up to Afghanistan and whatnot and start blowing everything up. Enduring Freedom. We wanted to remove the Taliban and dismantle Al-Qaeda and put on our own little regime going on in Afghanistan. We sort of never succeeded at that, but it's all good. And then the axis of evil. George Bush is officially in charge of naming everything, bro. Look, these are great. He could name my son, matter of fact. Name my son Operation Enduring Freedom. That'd be fire. But the axis of evil was a term used in his 2002 State of the Union address to label Iran, Iraq, North Korea, Afghanistan as like these terrorist harboring nations, and they had weapons of mass destruction. And this was basically just him saying, hey, if you're in the axis of evil, we're pulling up and we're just blowing up your country, basically. And one of these countries is Iraq. We get the Iraq War, where Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Now, don't get me wrong. Saddam Hussein is a terrible guy. He kills his own people, does chemical warfare on his own people, genocide, just everything bad. That's Saddam Hussein. But Bush went into Iraq because he was like, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction like nukes or something, and he's going to use them on us. They go into Iraq. There might not have been weapons of mass destruction, but it's all good because we got Saddam Hussein. We found him in the hiding spot. He jumped in a hole in North Iraq with his air vent and his fan. Like Bravo 6, he was going dark. They were never going to find Saddam until they did. He was just in a hole in the ground, covered his hole with some bricks in a sandbag. Like, where's Waldo with the Middle Eastern fat man? But yeah, they got him. He can't hide forever. Delta Force found him. We sent him back, or actually we didn't even send him back. We just put him up in trial and they killed him. So, poor guy. Actually, not really. I don't feel bad at all. But yeah, we sort of did what we came to do. We went into Iraq. We got Saddam Hussein. We left. Pretty rad. Patriot Act. This was passed shortly after 9/11, which expanded the government's surveillance powers to detect and prevent terrorism, which is like if you send a text or if you send an email or if you write a letter, the government can look at that. And they can be like, is this talking about terrorism? Nope. All right, it can go. So this is sort of like a breach of privacy-ish, but they were everyone was just sort of stingy about terrorism. Then there's Guantanamo Bay, and they were like, if you're a terrorist or a suspected terrorist, that's where things get a little murky. They could send you to Guantanamo Bay, where you would not be in America, and hence they could torture you to try to get information out of you. It was sort of like a human rights abuse, but it is what it is. And so yeah, that human rights people are a little bit pissy about that, but you can't win them all, right? And then you get the Surveillance Act after 9/11, which is sort of the same thing as the Patriot Act. I don't know why it's here, but where the U.S. government is just collecting vast amounts of data from phone calls, emails, internet activity, in the name of national security, and some people don't like that, so yeah. And then we got the election of 2004, George W. Bush back up, going against some random Democrat, doesn't matter, Bush wins, hooray. Mostly because of the stuff going on in Iraq and people are just feeling patriotic. Then there's Hurricane Katrina, and that comes and like blows up New Orleans, major loss of life. Federal government's delayed and ineffective response, and people were like angry about that. Then there's the Great Recession. There's like a 2008 stock market crash, and the economy starts to like go tumbling backwards. And this is because there was like a speculative bubble, if you remember from like the first Great Depression, when there was like companies were overvaluing themselves because there was no SEC. We were running into that same thing, but with the internet, where like .com companies were overvaluing themselves, and it led to like the same thing. It wasn't as bad as the Great Depression, but it was a pretty big financial crisis. And then we got the election of 2008. My boy Gay Rock Obama going up against war hero John McCain, who is really sexy, by the way, if you look at photos of young John McCain. The big issues were the financial travesty, the Iraq War, the dissatisfaction with the Bush administration. And Obama was focused on change, reconciliation, economic recovery, healthcare reform was a big thing, restoring diplomatic relations around the world. McCain was more focused on national security, economic stability, and he had a bunch of experience, but still the financial crisis sort of like undermined his credibility, and people just were not really rocking with George Bush and the Republicans, so they all voted for Obama, and he took the big dub. He won decisively. took 53% of the popular vote, which is pretty good for by modern standards, and had a big electoral college victory. And he became the first black president. And yeah, policy initiatives. He pursued a bunch of policies aimed at economic recovery, healthcare reform, environmental protection, like the $800 billion stimulus package, the Affordable Care Act, a bunch of like democratic, progressive, social things. But if you're progressive, he was a great president. Successes and failures of Obama's presidency. The Affordable Care Act, many thought was a good thing. It's health insurance for millions of Americans. Economic stimulus package, which again helped to prevent a deeper recession and sort of started our economic comeback. He also improved relations with Cuba, killed Osama bin Laden, which everyone agrees was amazing. Helped to negotiate the Paris Climate Agreement, which is an upgrade from the Kyoto operation or whatever that thing was called. Legalized same-sex marriage. However, the recovery from the Great Recession was slow, and Americans still continued to struggle with high unemployment, and his foreign policy was criticized for still blowing everything up in the Middle East. And then there's the Tea Party movement, and this was a response to the increasing size of government, particularly like the stimulus package and stuff. People were like, that's too much, you're just like giving out money now, like what are we doing? And so it was conservative people who were saying that, the government was just getting too freaking big, and they wanted it to be smaller and spend less money on like via taxes. And they were big in the 2010 midterm, helping Republicans gain control of the House of Representatives. And then there's American exceptionalism. This is the United States' belief that we are unique and that we are the best, and we're just rad, basically. We are exceptional. We are the model for the world. We are just the bomb, and that is what American exceptionalism is. And hey, man, I believe it. You look back on history, we've been doing this whole course. We are the bomb. We've had some hiccups, right? The Civil War wasn't great, but we fought to free slaves. We fought World War II. We've been doing all these things. We're basically the bomb. No glaze or anything, but what can I say? I'm just. Oh, oops. I wasn't even. Here we are. You know what? I'll just finish this out because why not? Go fast. America's changing role in the world. After Donald Trump became president, we became more isolationist. Although many people think we should be more interventionist. So we're kind of thinking now, what is our role in the world? Should we go out there and intervene in foreign affairs, or should we stay reserved and stay to ourselves? Impeachments. Donald Trump was impeached twice. The first time was for abuse of power, I think, and then the second time was for inciting a riot. But neither of times he was acquitted both times and never actually convicted. And then there was COVID-19. I don't need to tell you about COVID-19. Obviously, high unemployment, disruptions in the banking industry, travel, hospitality, whatever. And the government enacted a bunch of stimulus packages and vaccines and whatnot. And then the 2020 election happens. The big Don loses, and he throws a little hissy fit. And yeah, so, and then, he says he doesn't lose. Everyone shows up to the Capitol on a nice little peaceful protest. They just all happened to be in the area, and they're like, wouldn't it be crazy if we all just went and like toured the Capitol at the same time? And it was just a real big misunderstanding. Who really knows what was going on there? And then there's Joe Biden, of course. But this is no longer Bosnian War Biden. This is old, senile, decrepit Biden. Poor guy. I mean, he's a really lovely guy. He's adorable, but he tried to reverse a bunch of Trump policies. He tried to get us recovering from COVID. He had pretty weak foreign policy, but he was good on climate change. He tried to improve healthcare. He gave more stimulus packages, that sort of thing. And then there are the January 6th riots, which I just talked about. And then the last thing you need to know is Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, which is overturning Roe v. Wade, which was the federal protection on abortion. So now certain states can make abortion illegal, like in Texas. I think it's 6 weeks after the pregnancy, and you can no longer have an abortion, whereas in California you can have it whenever, where, like that little Shakira song. But that is officially everything, and we have finished AP US history. So pat yourself on the back. This is the last Gideon Hawk video of this year at the least. I might make him for AP Gov next year. Definitely take AP Gov. And yeah, guys, it's been really fun. Thank you for letting me, make these and watching them. And it's been super fun for me, and I hope I've been able to help y'all out. So y'all will do great on this test. Go rock on. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. So it's been a pleasure. And I'll see you boys next year. Gideon Michael out.